Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Yanira Arias. I am the National Campaigns Manager for Alianza Americas. We welcome you to the 5th session of the Root Causes series of migration from Central America, with voices from leaders and allies from the sub-region working as journalists and as advocates. The purpose of this series is to raise the voices from Central America in an effort to collectively build a deeper analysis on the root causes driving migration from Central America in recent decades. We hope that this series contributes to highlight what needs to change to address forced displacement in the region. Today, we will discuss about gender discrimination and gender violence, a challenge, difficult and painful topic. This is a joint effort led by Alianza Americas with the sponsorship of Latin America Working Group, Center for Gender and Refugee Studies, OXFAM America, Presente.org, Casa Yurumein, ONECA, Centro Presente, CARECEN of San Francisco, Hondureños Contra el SIDA, CARECEN of Washington, D.C. We want to acknowledge the support of Latino rebels who are sharing this event live on Facebook. We invited today for the conversation to the following leaders. Vanessa Siliezar from Honduras. She is a lawyer, feminist, activist, and defender of women's human rights, professor and chair of Women's Studies and Human Rights at the Universidad Nacional Autónoma de Honduras in La Ceiba. Founding partner and executive director of the Unidad de Desarrollo Integral de la Mujer y la Familia, UDIMUF, a feminist organization, non-for-profit, that fights against patriarchal violence and gender inequality. Our second panelist is Claudia Interiano from El Salvador. Claudia Interiano is a lawyer and notary public, regional coordinator of the transnational area of the Foundation for Justice and the Democratic State of Law in Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador, on issues of access to justice for families of disappeared migrants, massacres, and extrajudicial executions of migrants, more than 20 years of experience with civil society organizations. In El Salvador, legally advising actions in face of serious rights violations, human rights such as massacres of the civilian population, for displacements of adults, forced disappearance of girls and boys during the armed conflict. Last but not least, our third panelist is Daniel Villatoro Garcia from Guatemala. Daniel, he is a journalist and the executive director of Visibles, a human rights organization that works for the LGBTIQ+ people in Guatemala. He also coordinates the Latin American Reporting Initiative on LGBTIQ+ people in the International Women's Media Foundation. His areas of expertise are investigative journalism and social technology projects, in addition to addressing representation and discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity through various initiatives. So we hope that you join us for this conversation. Each panelist will have the opportunity to answer the questions that we have for them. They will elaborate for over 3 minutes. And we will start with Vanessa, following with Claudia, and our third panelist to respond to questions is going to be Daniel. Starting with Vanessa, first question for you. How would you characterize gender violence in your country? Are there specific or outstanding features?
Thank you for the opportunity. Good afternoon to everybody. Well, I think in Honduras, the level of violence against girls and adolescents have drastically increased in issues such as domestic violence, sexual assault, harassment, and sexual assault at work. So we're talking about trafficking and sexual exploitation. These are increasing to the high levels of impunity in our community. So let us remember that Honduras is the only country in the world who criminalizes the use of emergency contraception. And like Nicaragua and El Salvador, it's denied any possibility of having an abortion even when women's lives are in danger. Which show a high power of the religious leadership and a macho culture and patriarchal thoughts that validate such step back. They are coming exactly from our Congress. No? So I think the Honduran government has taken the COVID pandemic as an excuse for delay in the few investigation of processes, and due to the confinement measures, women and girls who are victims of such as actions has not been able to report their aggressors, who in the most cases are men who actually live with them at home. In addition to this, if we add, and let us think about the indigenous, Garífunas, and Afro-descendant women who are fighting for the right of their ancestral lands and their resources. Transnational and foreign companies has been authorized by the state's law and government institutions to criminally accuse these defenders who are prosecuted and persecuted for defending what they have historically exploited for the good of the community.
Thank you, Vanessa. Claudia.
Hello, thank you for the opportunity too. For our organization and the work we do in Mexico, Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador, we can see this context decade marked by an exponential increase in cases of forced disappearance, murder, kidnapping, and extortion. The mass migration, the criminalization of migrants, serious human rights violations too. And there is a common factor. Migrants from Central American countries like Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador, but also the impunity. Like that, the migrant population confronted with human trafficking networks, extortion, and threats to continue on their way, forced recruitment. Also, in many cases, the death and the massacres, we also give some work about that. Between 2010 and 2012, the massacres of 72 migrants, we heard about those massacres, the discovery of 196 remains in 49 clandestine graves in Mexico too. Also, the Cadereytas massacre in Nuevo León are some of the contexts of violence in the region. Also, more than 82,000 people disappear in Mexico. That is some words from Alejandro Encina's Human Rights Undersecretary. Is also the context. And even more current contexts are Camargo massacre, the extrajudicial execution of migrants, also like Victoria's case, the Salvadorian refugee who was living in Mexico and protected by Mexico. And there is no reliable official database to establish the number of missing migrants in Mexico. Indeed, of these 82,000 migrants, we are counting thousands of Guatemala, Honduras, and Salvadorian people. It is necessary that the official records include this information, their countries of origin also do not report this missing in each country. And women are the ones who are doing the search. For the most of the part of people we support in our organization, the most of them are women. Women are searching in the region. And these women also suffer intimidation, violence, and persecution due to the search. They probably will spend years, decades, or a lifetime searching for an answer. And the impacts on mental, emotional, and physical health, we can speak about hypertension, anxiety, diabetes, for example. Thank you.
Thank you, Claudia. Claudia Interiano is joining us from El Salvador. For everyone who just joined us to the webinar, we just heard from Claudia Interiano from El Salvador. Also joining us, Vanessa Siliezar from Honduras, and Daniel Villatoro from Guatemala. And we just heard from Vanessa and Claudia. We are now going to hear from Daniel. Daniel, I'm gonna repeat the questions for the folks who just joined us. And also, speaking of questions, please send us your questions or comments via the Q&A function. I will repeat the question for Daniel. How would you characterize gender violence in your country? Are there specific or outstanding features?
I think that in the work that we do, we see gender violence, also related to sexual orientation and gender identity. What we see, especially in LGBTI people, is that you see violence from within the household. The families, the parents are the principal or the first step towards gender violence. So that's something that's really familiar and common, but at times we don't see it as gender violence. We don't see that really first interaction with society as a space where practices of gender violence get normed or become natural for us. I will say that in general, in Guatemala, we've seen, especially related to femicides, some and violence in households, an increase during the pandemic. I think that's something that we've seen in Latin America, at least in different countries, where the measures of being together at homes kind of like nurture, these violence and kind of make the infrastructure for gender violence to be the norm in households. And then especially about LGBTI people, I would like to talk about what we describe as hate-based violence or violence by prejudice. We see it generally, but what we don't see is how discrimination and gender violence is normed and felt as natural in institutions. For example, in an employment poll, 13,000 youth people said that they were discriminated by their sexual orientation at applying at jobs. So it's a really big number if you consider the usual sub-registry or misrepresentation of violence or discrimination related to LGBTI population or sexual orientation in this case. The other thing that is really palpable in Guatemala and related to migration is that you also see xenophobia being mixed with the fact that we, in the migration context, we become in Guatemala kind of like the northern country or the country where people from Honduras or El Salvador pass or stay. And in this context, what we've seen is that the appliance or we've seen an increase on the request of refugee status here in Guatemala from people from Honduras and El Salvador. It has really increased to, we have 47 in 2016. We're now reporting in 2020, 446 people that are trying to get that status in Guatemala, not just in the US or in Mexico. So that correlates or that adds to the dynamics of gender violence, where you also see a bigger number in women and LGBTI population escaping their context of violence, but also trying to find ways, institutional ways, or different ways to report these at their places. That's what generally the context in this case.
Thank you, Daniel, for that thorough response. We're going to the next question. For everyone, remember the first panelist to respond to questions is going to be Vanessa Siliezar Turcios from Honduras, followed by Claudia Interiano, El Salvador, and Daniel Villatoro Garcia. Our third panelist is the third person answering the question. Second question is, what are, in your opinion, the root causes of gender-based violence? Specifically, how has impacted on women and girls and the LGBTIQ+ persons? Vanessa.
Well, what a tough question, you know, because we don't have plenty of time to talk about it, but I do believe that corruption and poverty are the element that does the most harm to women's and LGBTIQ+ population. Our stakeholders and policymakers refuse to recognize essential rights for this group, such as the right to safe and free abortion, to equal marriage for the LGBT community, and also to use emergency contra pills in cases that are necessary from the health systems. So if you add to that the impunity that exists in this country, leaves the victim without hope, since they do not find answers to get out of the violence that surrounds them. And we are not talking about gangs and maras. No, it's not just that. We are talking about the structural violence that is born from the omission of the government and the little social investment in these issues. The money that our taxes are paying are spending on fraudulent purchases, and there are not a single indicted in prison. So if you come to Honduras, you will find out that there's these high levels of corruption come from our government, but you're not gonna find anyone at jail. I need to, I'm sorry. I need to add to this the strong militarization that this country has experienced since the coup in 2009. There are more soldiers in Honduras than doctors or nurses, and even teachers. The substantial reduction in the budgets of Ministries of Health and Education during this government has deteriorated both systems. And if you add COVID-19, has exposed how weak access to quality and free health the population is experienced. Remember, we are the unique country in Central America without vaccines. And unfortunately, this implies that the population does not receive quality medical treatment and does not receive adequate education in this century. So this gap is getting bigger and our population is fleeing because of it.
Thank you, Vanessa, for reminding us of those complex issues with not just the systemic violence, but also tackle their things related to homophobia, lesbophobia, transphobia as well, that has to have, as you said, not only related to organized crime, that is also in the fabric of the civil society that we also need to work, that is also reflected in how the states treat girl, women, and the LGBTQI communities. Claudia.
Thank you. Well, in the work we do and with the gender vision also in this work, we can see, well, not that different context of violence like Vanessa has said some seconds ago. And the disappearance of people, that this is practically an history since many times ago, since many years ago in El Salvador. These disappearances of women also are like a naturalization of that kind of violence, of the violence and the torture and the sexual abuse too. The disappearance of people, the disappearance of women too, is undoubtedly the most serious and heinous crime that is currently affecting the Central American population, no indeed just El Salvador. This is an expansion, this expansion of disappearances in the region is part of a process of transformation of violence manifested in the irruption of extreme and daily forms of crime, which seeks to subdue and dominate the victims, communities, and society in general through the use of terror. This is a way of preserving power based on impunity and fueled by institutional weakness and the tolerance of different social sectors. That is also the base of the discrimination to women and LGBTI population. And also the structural violence, the militarization in the city, violence against women, and the discrimination, as I said before, the naturalization of violence by different social sectors in the society, indeed in the El Salvador society.
Thank you, Claudia. Also a reminder that the war in El Salvador reminds us a lot of the more than 75,000 thousands of people that were disappeared during the war, and what we can learn from the history is very important as well when we want to tackle issues related to gender violence. Daniel.
Well, if we talk about the root causes, I believe that we have to address education and the capacity that we have as humans to understand each other and the structural base of our educational systems. Sadly, what we see in Central America, from what I've heard from Vanessa and Claudia, and that I agree with that related to militarization and the community of violence as our main form of interaction, violence as the mean of interaction that we learn very early on our stage, and that this is really, this affects more broadly and differently to women and LGBTI population. But I believe also that there's a lot of prejudice and misinformation, I also believe in cultural factors as of our beliefs or the lack of laicity in our educational system, that, beliefs are really strong held towards, the hierarchy between male or female, et cetera, the normation of behavioral and identities. And we see that also in contexts where we have indigenous or indigenous people, right? Here in Guatemala, we have a lot of Mayan related people. And you also see racism there as a form of hierarchy and related to the lack of education. So you do see violence, gender violence also as part of our way of learning how to interact to each other. And this really mixes with what they say about the context of the militarization and the past of our countries. The social need or the social structure of our societies is based on mistrust and also learning from the past of the wars that we had on the past and the long-held conflict that we had here in Guatemala. And related to migration, I would like to say that for me, it's really impressive to see people escaping because they're not feeling free to be themselves. It was really amazing for me to see people in the migrant caravans themselves, stating themselves as trans for the first time, or having an equal marriage that they cannot have on the countries where they were born. So you do see that this oppression from the system or from the state or from the situations that we're living in this context, it's also part of the causes of us looking for a place where we feel free or where we feel that we have opportunities. And I'm impressed also by the fact that we have a better lens related to the gender differentiation related to migration. I think that we used to talk about migration only, as parents or male parents that they migrate to kind of like sustain a household. But now we have a bigger understanding of how children, how women, how LGBTI population are feeling related to the violence that they encounter in their countries. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel, for that very important part of reminding us that a lot of the LGBTQI plus people is just trying to have the right to of identity, and fighting for that right of identity is putting them in harm's ways in their own country, in the migration route, but also in the United States if they are detained. Now that we had discussed the roots and some of the similarities of the gender violence, we're gonna go over on what is being done for protections in these three countries. And to remind our audience that our three panelists will be answering the same questions. And the next question is, what protection does the state offer to victims of gender violence? Are there shelters, protective measures, psychological treatment, medical treatment, among others? Vanessa, please go ahead.
Oh, thank you. Well, the answer is no. The government, our government claims to have protection projects. However, in reality, we see there's huge building with beautiful offices, rimbombantes, I don't know how to say it in English, rimbombantes names with structures full of employees and few resources allocated for the real protection of the victims. The ones who are giving medical, psychological treatment are the NGOs. So us, the advocates, are the ones who are asking to international cooperation to help us to give the answer to the local communities. And you can see it so easily because after ETA and IOTA, these huge storms, they were bigger than the Mitch hurricane, people were like, totally unprotected. Until now, there's plenty of communities who doesn't receive any answer for the government, nor even the local government. So what happened? For the matter that we are the one who are responding for these responsibilities and necessity, due to the high levels of the impunity, poverty, and violence, people is really sad, and if you add to that LGBTIQ plus community does not have legal protection, because we saw it, there's not a way that we can protect from domestic violence to a gay couple. Because there is we are cupped by hands. So at the time, we see with a lot of concern that public officials continue to privilege their political followers. And the result of this at the primary election is not encouraging at all for our future in Honduras. I think the politicians have milked this country with useless hospital, without vaccine, with false data, with no effort at all to immunize the population, and without any single commitment to recognize human rights for LGBTIQ community, and to give effort and also to invest in the real necessities of our country community.
Thank you, Vanessa. And yes, you're right with what you mentioned, investing on a beautiful building from the outside with catchy names, or really institutions that have a plan and invest in resources for assisting people affected by gender violence and discrimination. Now we're gonna go over with Claudia with the same questions. I'm gonna repeat the question. What protection does the state offer to victims of gender violence? Are there shelters, protective measures, psychological treatment, medical treatment, among others?
Well, it's a difficult answer about, definitely there probably has been some advances in some ways. And for example, there is a creation of a unit in the to investigate disappearances in El Salvador's territory, but there is not an effort about to investigate cases of migrants in the disappeared. And well, there is an obvious also context about that, because El Salvador cannot investigate a case in Mexico, for example, about what happened with women who has disappeared in there. But El Salvador can do cooperation with Mexico. I am doing like an example when I name these countries. And in this collaboration, to ask for their citizens in the protection of human rights. And from that idea, El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras has to ask for this collaboration and to the transit countries. I think civil society has been doing a good work and a huge work in the region. And in this big work, the Organization of Families of Disappeared and Executed Migrants, I can say that 80% of women are doing the searching in the region. The most of the cases we are attending, the 80% of women who are doing the searching. Also, another advance are the forensic banks. These forensic banks are like an institutional effort, but also with the participation of civil society from El Salvador, Honduras, Guatemala, and Mexico. These forensic banks also are doing some answers to the families, to the women who are searching. And these forensic banks also are attended by ombudsman offices, for example, and some of the consulates in some countries. Another advance we can say, probably trying to find some advances in the way of the answer to, is the creation of the migrants unit that handles cases in embassies and the Mexican Foreign Support Mechanism. It is a path of access to justice, because we are talking that it's supposed this unit has to be an access to justice to the countries of origin, to do the searching and to do the investigation of cases. For now, we can talk of this effort around 120 complaints of cases of missing persons. This number doesn't mean is the huge problem, but is the number of cases we can attend for now with this unit. And these cases comes from Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador also, and we try to do the collaboration also with the consulates and the migrant unit of the Mexican Fiscalía General. And the majority of the complainants are made for women too. Well, that's for my answer in this question. Thank you.
Thank you, Claudia. Well, I'm sure that many of the few steps forward have been the result of the tireless work over many years led by feminist groups and women, also part of the civil society, pushing for changes, real changes in not just in the law, but as you mentioned, the needed resources to provide the support, but also the justice that victims of gender violence and discrimination need. Now we're going to move to Guatemala with Daniel. What you can share with us regarding this question?
Perfect. So in gender violence, we saw in 2009 the implementation of feminicide law that states also other sources or other typification of crimes against women. But that law specifically, its implementation depended basically on a specific institute besides the criminal part for psychological attention or health and all the other parts. That was called the Victims Institute. And the Victims Institute, even though it existed on paper for many years, until September 2020, started functioning as a full unit because of budget and other, bureaucracy reasons. So you see also a 10-year gap on implementation on a law, even though it was the femicide law. So that implementation has been really slow, but the transversalization or of gender in some of the state units is broader now, but it needs to be bolder, I will say some examples. For example, in the Congress, we have a Women's Commission that is presided by a man. And last year, our government, Guatemala has a presidential secretariat of women. And last year, our president tried to close that institution. That institution wasn't closed. There was a big constitutional fight related to that, but it's now operating. But at the end, it's weakening the institutional means related to addressing this violence and other women's related issues. And I will just like to point out some names of the civil society that do this kind of work, like OSAR, the Observatory of Sexual and Reproductive Rights, Mujer, Women's Transforming the World, MTM, that does a lot of psychology and especially to victims of sexual violence, and also Fundación Sobrevivientes, Survivals Foundation, that they are the leading organizations in civil society, providing this in this context where the state probably doesn't have these units operating that much. In the LGBT, I feel that I will say that the only institution that clearly has a mandate is our Ombudsman Office, PDH is called. They have a specific part of the Ombudsman mandate, but have a specific LGBTI office. And because of what they do, which is basically just see and recommend work to the institutions of the state, but not doing it themselves, it's kind of hard to see advancements in addressing LGBTI violence. And we saw that last year, the ombudsman was cited or fiscally cited at Congress because they did a simple anti-discrimination gesture by putting the rainbow flag on the Pride commemoration of last year, right? So if the only office that you have is ombudsman, and he gets, his work is being criminalized when he defends LGBT population, it's really hard to see advancement. We've seen advancement in lower institutions or in specific protocols of attention or in a specific units of some of the security and justice institutions, and also at training, but without a specific mandate or a broader, more a broader and bolder statement related to LGBTI issues. There's really not much institutional handling that the people at these offices can do related to LGBTI issues. And that will be the context of how the state is really covering gender violence.
Thank you, Daniel. I would like to encourage our audience to continue to send their questions via the Q&A function. My colleagues from Alianza Americas are paying attention to your comments and questions. So we're gonna go opening the mic for answering the questions from, not the mic, but we're gonna be reading the questions that we have received via the Q&A function. So let's move to the next question for our panelists. It is, from your specific work experience, what are the threats that you observe that women and LGBTIQ+ persons face, and what can be done in order to eradicate gender-based violence? We'll start with Vanessa.
Thank you, Yanira. Well, as you know, I'm a lawyer, so I need to address to this kind of subject because it's very important for us as a human rights defender and as a group of feminists, feminist movement, like we said. Well, I don't know if you know, but in Honduras, the penal code was changed this year. And one of the great recommendations that the international community and the different human rights committees made to the National Congress of this country was not to reduce the penalty of sexual crimes, but unfortunately, they did, and this is a huge, step back. Will not go on with the criminal prosecution because the crime has very small or low penalty. So why? Because rape and domestic violence was reduced for not exceed a year. So this is the community does not receive an answer when we talk about rape, because women do not have an answer when we talk about domestic and intrafamilial violence. And these changes are a real step back for our women, girls, and adolescents. So what happened? At the end of the day, as an organization, we have seen that women's and LGBTI community are practically expelled from this country. And I believe the factors that maybe can help to stop or the caravans include, like Daniel said, the guarantee of the secular state, a true and real separation from the church and the state, because of the advance of the fundamentalistic thoughts. And another cause can be allowing women and girls not to be mothers forcibly, and allowing legal, safe, and free abortion, and also recognizing the use of the emergency contraceptive pill is vital to advance in reproductive health rights issues. I think also United States must take action that aim to stopping migration from inside of our country and not with palliative measures. Because if you bring military forces through your borders, it will not help, you know? You're not addressing the problem. You're just adding more obstacles to the problem, because our population is surrounded by military. So when a population is afraid and hunger, nothing will stop them. And poverty is real in this country, and our communities are, you know, struggling right now. So at the end, I must add that LGBTIQ plus community seeks freedom to enjoy their sexuality, respect, to be able to live freely and free of discrimination due to their sexual orientation and their gender expression. And that is only achievable if you live in a country where there is an education, a laicity, like Danielle says, equal opportunities, legislature and policy makers who are really committed with the population. And at this is the last what we have here, you know? And it's really concerned that what we are gonna have in November, the new elections, we don't feel like any kind of hope that something's gonna change. And why? Because at the end of the day, no matter which party is ruling in the big of the North, no matter if it's Republican or if it's Democratic, the truth is that foreign policies from the United States government will not change too much. It will not change enough, you know. United States government is very vocal with foreign countries like Venezuela, but it's not vocal with Honduras, even though we are surrounded by narcos. And it's obviously the milk that they have been doing with our money. So our people is gonna leave because they feel fear. And I don't know if you are listening, have you ever feel fear? Fear stop you, you know. But fear push our people to leave this beautiful country because they don't have opportunities. And it's a sense that all of us have in our heart. And it's really tough to explain.
Thank you, Vanessa, for also reminding us that policy has to be run by also with the feedback and institutions that comes from civil society, that the militarization only triggers incidents that can bring back memories of trauma, but also the military are not the best bodies for providing justice or protection to people surviving gender discrimination and gender violence. And thank you for letting us know for the situation in Honduras. Now we're gonna go with El Salvador and the answer that Claudia has for us.
Thank you. Well, for this context too, due to the vulnerability of the situation of the migrant population and the women who are doing the searching and they're asking for crimes and crimes investigation. Also is fundamental, the cooperation between states is the special importance to understand the context of the women who are doing the searching and they're asking for crimes investigation too. Also about the comprehensive assistance to victims and search for missing persons from a transnational and multidisciplinary approach. Is fundamental too that the embassies and consulates should be strange and to have a gateway for reports and complaints of cases of missing migrants, to keep the complaints informed and guarantee the participation of the women who are doing the searching of missing migrants from their country of origin, and the understanding of their necessities because the gender stereotypes too. There has to be a special emphasis on the mechanism of communication and exchange of information for the search and investigation in cases of disappeared migrants between the specialized prosecutors' offices for disappearance, the existing search commissions, and the secretaries of foreign relations. Also, it's very important the formation or to facilitate the understanding of the interinstitutional and multidisciplinary groups to investigate cases of missing migrants. And the celebration of collaboration agreements with authorities of other countries for the investigation of the cases. The search and investigation protocols of comprehensive care for victims must consider the context of the family, the gender perspective regarding the specific needs of women in the search for their loved ones, and the demand for the access to justice. Also, a specific methodology for cases of missing migrants from a transnational and regional perspective. The most of the families, the most of the women who are doing the searching and they're asking for the investigation, also asking every time they can do that, they are asking for a special commission for the investigation of cases of disappearance, cases of massacres, and extrajudicial execution of migrants that occur in Mexico. And also with the monitoring and collaboration of the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights and the United Nations in international organizations. And finally, I have to talk or to speak also about a real and effective implementation by countries, by the countries like El Salvador, about the Global Compact. Objectives 7 and 8 are referring to saving lives and searching for people, and also have this Global Compact some principles that includes the gender perspective. Thank you.
Thank you, Claudia. Daniel, please help us answer the questions regarding Guatemala.
So the risks and the paths to eradicate this gender violence that we've seen, I think that, for example, we have a big risk related to identity conflict. We've seen confrontations within the countries and within the institutions relating to a lot of things related to gender, but also to identity. And I'm worried because that really is a source or a space of confrontation, but also we've seen more polarization related to gender issues now. As we've seen an advancement of some of the main, gender recognition, like femicide, we also see a strong idea that these shouldn't exist, these measures shouldn't exist. So I'm just worried about the social infrastructure or the cultural interaction between, this is the part of the society that see this as an agenda, or sadly, there's also a lot of misinformation related to gender. And now for some sectors, gender is kind of, like a forbidden or a bad word. And that really puts us in a cultural war in a way for those that we are endorsing and trying to get better conditions for gender to be recognized as part of the legal, the infrastructural, the institutional frameworks of or societies and or states. Related LGBTI issues, I just wanted to share a report that covers the 3 countries, was done by Human Rights Watch. It covers discrimination and violence against LGBTI people in a context of migration. I think that for the people that are attending, this will be useful. And it has the 3 countries. And then I'm going to share other things that we at the research work that Visibles has done can conceptualize about how to eradicate violence. But for example, I think that one of the main risks is also that we need to address it more, but be more understanding of the places where people come. At times, the states, when they do this, at times they kind of force people into this thinking instead of, being more human or empathizing about understanding really what's gender violence, how our bodies or people are being affected by it, instead of seeing it as a policy or just, we see it also as ideology now, right? Which is misinformation, but it's part of the cultural framework of our countries, and that the educational and lack of laicity in public discussion. Then to eradicate it, I think that we also need a cultural approach. At times we're trying for people to understand with their heads and not with their hearts. And for example, I was really shocked when to learn from my mother or from my sisters the experiences of gender violence that they face, or to understand something as simple as unpaid labor, right? And that makes me a person that understands it and tries to not, engage in this sort of violence or this violence framework that we have as a society is part of our patriarchal framework of living, right? But I think that we should do this by empathy and also by conversations with the people themselves. We've seen a lot of times people discussing about LGBTI issues that are not without LGBTI people there, and without that representation and being part of the table, a big feminist, principle, a seat at the table. And we expect that in our Congress and in other forms of our institutional framework too. So I think that that's another form to eradicate this gender violence that we've seen. It's sad to see at times that you see that not all women in Congress are going to be working for a women's agenda in a way. But at the end, even though they're not all going to be doing it, just having that representation and having more access to that can make people that are going to have that gender vision change from the top down. Also, when doing the whole changing our society is really complex and it's a big scale operation. So we need institutional framework for that.
Thank you, Daniel. And thank you, everyone, all the panelists, for answering the questions. We have more questions from the audience. We're going to try to choose some of them because of the sake of time. I'm going to start with what elements do you believe are specific to gender-based violence if we have fear for our future? How do we ask for help to go into exile? And we're going to try to answer in the same order, Vanessa, Claudia, and Daniel, or in this case, raise your hand if you want to jump in first. Yeah, I don't know if Vanessa, she's been having problems with her connection. Maybe in the meantime, oh, Vanessa, you're there?
Could you please
Yes.
repeat it?
I'll repeat the question. What elements do you believe are specific to gender-based violence if we have to fear for our future? How do we ask for help to go into exile?
Well, I'm not sure if I was able to understand the question, but I think in our countries there's not an investment in not enough investment in intersectional and also gender and equal rights for LGBT community. So there's a lot of NGO and women's movement who are actually addressing to this kind of gaps. And I think we are open arms. We really want to take, to be advocates and give answer to this community, but we need to work together. And it's required that we, you know, demands the government the answer and the appropriate investment in this kind of project, because the common factor in our countries are that our governments has a lot of employees but do not have enough resources to allocate to our communities. So there's not an answer and an effective one to address these kind of necessities. For give you an example, we have about 8 shelters for women who are suffering domestic violence, but all of them are supported by NGOs or feminist movement. Not a single one of them received money from the government. And if you add to that what COVID has made to womenhood around the world, you may now know that they are full of women and girls who need an answer, and an effective one. Because domestic violence is true, you know, and they are not addressing this problem. And if you think and add about Garifuna women who need someone who can speak their own language, if you talk about a woman with disabled capacities who does not fit into the background, there's no laws to talk about openly about it, and not even budgets who are aiming to fulfill this kind of necessities. But you can find all that kind of stuff out of this country, because there's like more, not only commitment, is that our stakeholders go into our government, make our laws, but they don't have a conscience. I do believe that that's the problem.
Thank you, Vanessa. Now I'll repeat the question for Claudia and Daniel. What elements do you believe are specific to gender-based violence if we fear for our future? How do we ask for help to get into exile, to leave our countries?
I will, well, probably there are many points about this question, but it makes me think a lot about the naturalization of the violence in that intersectional addressing that we could work. The naturalization of the violence and the abuse and discrimination, I think, is the fundamental approach about to work in that specific question.
Thank you, Claudia. Daniel, please.
So I think that you also need to understand the racism and the cultural composition of our societies. And for example, also for the institutional follow-up, main languages in Guatemala are really determinant to impunity, because it's not the attention from the state institutions related to anything in gender violence is going to be less stronger if you're not a native Spanish speaker. So that is really a factor related to intersectionality, right? Or indigenous populations are being, you know, they don't have access to our institutional system, and that's really worrying, especially in a country like Guatemala with a big percentage of its population being, you know, mixed and bigger indigenous. And I think that also understanding youth as a right and also as a population, you know, with a different approach related, because at times we're not citizens until we are 18. That happens a lot to teens that face, especially you face a lot of discrimination and a lot of gender violence in your forming years. So children, youth are not seen as at times as citizens or as people because they're minors, you know. So that I think that understanding also helps, because when you grow up, you kind of like get a acknowledgement of all the things that you live that were gender violence. You just didn't have those conceptual tools when you live that. So I think that empowering our youth and our minors is really another way to kind of tackle that cultural thing that we took. And when you talk about EXA, I think that I'm gonna switch. I think that it's really sad for me to see that a lot of LGBT people are not seeing their countries as a place to live, and they cannot fulfill their life project. They cannot have a family. They cannot have, you know, a marriage, or, you know, have income or patrimony at times as a family. So the life project or your life project is unavailable where you live. So that's really hard. That's heartbreaking. I always get emotional with this because I'm getting older and I'm just, do I have to leave Guatemala to feel freely or to fulfill my whole life project? And that's really harsh. And I think that I've seen it more and more. We've seen it more and more in the institutions, the reporting that we're seeing because of LGBTI migration. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel, for answering that from the heart as well. How that personally means for you, the answering this complicated topic. We still have more folks on the webinar, but we would like to make justice at least one more questions that we have received several. And the next is, any ideas on how to prevent violence, on how to bring about cultural changes against patriarchal culture?
That's an excellent question. I love it because I think actually we are doing it, and you are an organization who are helping. You know, we are doing it in our language, and another language that is not our mother tongue, but it is great. I will talk by experience, and you can see me with this object that is because I live in front of the sea in La Ceiba, you know, in Honduras. So it's really hot right now, but I love this place. I have a double citizenship. Actually, I can live in another part of the world, but I will not leave my country because I love what I do. I teach gender. I am a feminist. I, you know, fight for women's rights. And what we are doing, well, we are, you know, teaching girls how to be empowered, how to be vocal, how to believe in themselves, how to believe in God, but not totally be able to believe in the myth or in the magic message. And that's because of a lot of people believe and want to help us as an NGOs or as an advocates. It's so difficult in Latin America to be vocal and said, I'm a feminist in 21st century. So I really love the smile of Claudia because she understands how difficult it is, because there's a few of us and we are really visible. And that's dangerous too, isn't it? But the truth is that if we invest in girls, if we believe in the message of womanhood, and if we gather of the LGBT community, we are gonna be, you know, better citizenship. And that's gonna happen when we fight together against patriarchal and macho culture. And this is only possible through education. We will not allow that the religion will go on into our culture and our schools. It is true, it is dangerous, pretty dangerous. The message is dangerous for womanhood around the world. And that's what they want, you know, that we make step backs, but we are not gonna do it. So we're asking for help, not for money. We need new technicians, new tools to talk about gender issues, to talk about human rights of LGTB communities into schools. That's the answer. And I love what Jorge Prudot says. I know that you know that this is the best place in the world, in the whole country. So viva la ceiba.
Thank you, Vanessa. Claudia.
Thank you. Well, definitely feminist organizations and social society has been doing a huge work for many years. And that's why, for example, Vanessa, Daniel, Yanira, or myself, indeed, we can talk and speak about these issues right now at this time. And in that huge work, a lot of elements probably comes to my mind too about how to prevent violence. But I think to try to resume what I think we have to keep working in the social society too is like Vanessa says about education, but also about education of who we are, which is our diversity, to understand, to try to make a work about the understanding about the diversity of who is Vanessa, who is Yanira, who is Daniel. Nobody is like us, or each of us. And that is a fundamental in the politics too, in the education and in other, whatever kind of politics in every state.
Thank you, Claudia. Daniel, help us close in this portion of the question.
Well, I answered it, but basically I think that when we talk about culture, we usually don't respond to it as culture. So I would like to see the cultural institutions. And I will also invite you to see how music, arts, entertainment, media, they really help getting that out. Ricky Martin helped a lot of people understand some things, but also I'm amazed by how many of the musicians are now endorsing in feminism and doing this, and people are, I want to do this because these artists also told me about, and they're quoting, you know, the biggest feminist writers in history and making it popular, accessible. So I always think that we have to endorse this conversation in kind of like a radio, in a AM and FM way. We can do the in-depth, really academical or institutional civil society conversations, which are moving forward in the work that we do, but we also have to nurture and go to the common language, the mediatization, and the popular, what people are seeing, looking at. Probably we don't read the media that most of the population in our countries are reading. We have to go to radio because at times we forget that not everybody reads and talks in English and Spanish like we're doing right now. So we also always have to get, and I always joke that I like to do this really gender in-depth conversation, but I do that in my close friendships and in my work circle, because when I talk to other people, I have to, you know, do the ABC, kind of like the basics and the general thought, because that's going to be broader and it's going to make more approachable the work that we do. And we never have to forget that, because at times these recognition of gender as violence, it's also becoming, you know, a field of polarization, or I'm not going to work with this person because he doesn't think of himself as a feminist or things like that. So that can happen and we're free to decide that. But if we want to change the culture, we need to endorse in conversation with religious groups, with people that don't believe the same things that at times we believe in. And for us, human rights is something really common, but there's people that are criminalizing human rights as a topic, and we need to get into those conversations too. And at the end, I always ask what my mom or my grandmother are going to be reading and thinking. So that it always gives you an idea of a more general work and not the specific civil society work that I'm doing.
Thank you, Daniel. Thank you, Claudia, and thank you, Vanessa, for joining us today to discuss gender discrimination and gender violence. For everyone who continued to tune in the series, we have all of the videos from the now 5 conversations available in Alianza America's YouTube channel. You can also find it in our Facebook page and in our various social media platforms. And my colleagues are putting in the screen right now the next session, which is going to be climate change, another very difficult issue. Here in Puerto Rico, we are about to start officially the hurricane season. So now, before it was in June, now we're moving it to start in May. So these are things that we need to pay attention as well when it comes to the root causes of migration. And big lessons that we have from this discussion: if there are more military bases and police stations than schools in your community, that's a big issue. If we want to discuss violence, also if we want to educate, education came different times throughout the conversation. If we want to have stronger and more humane and fair services for people surviving discrimination, gender discrimination, we need to have the necessary resources and the voices of impacted communities and leaders such as Vanessa, Claudia, and Daniel. It gives me a lot of hope seeing the great work that you all are doing. I left El Salvador 21 years ago due to gender violence precisely. So it gives hope. People working right now on the front lines doing this work in Central America. And now that we see it on the streets, youth also amplifying the demands of more effective policies, but also changing the governments that are promoting the violence. It is also giving us hope. We thank our partners in this series, the Latin America Working Group, Center for Gender and Refugee Studies, OXFAM America, Presente.org, Casa Yurumein, ONECA, Centro, Presente, CARECEN of San Francisco, Honduras, Hondureños contra el SIDA, and CARECEN of Washington, D.C. Again, join us for the next session and follow us on Facebook, also in our YouTube channel. Thank you to our panelists and thank you to all for joining us this afternoon. Goodbye.
Thank you.